Much has been debated about horror's limited place in anime, through Reddit threads, anti-tubers, and the ethereal dream plane, yet you would be hard-pressed to find a genre more culturally impactful than horror. Sure, it hasn't altered the media landscape like superhero movies or the ass-slapping westerns of old, well, unless you don't count zombie movies anyway. But even with that exception, horror has made entire generations be wary around dolls, clowns, and to the Zoomers and Gen Alphas, animatronics. There really is no concept you couldn't slap the horror tag onto and not have a whole new generation of kids shudder when looking at a jar of peanut butter. Horror can be added to anything. The topic of this video, anime, is no exception. Shows like Genesis Evangelion used horror to redefine the mecha genre, turning pillars of humanity or war, mostly war, into unknowable alien creatures, literally called angels. Decades later, Attack on Titan expanded on this new fear by turning mechas into grotesque distortions of humans, giving these titans the feeling of staring into a funhouse mirror of humanity that also wants nothing more than to eat you whole. Moving swiftly on before some of you get hard, as is expected, anime is no stranger to themes of the horrific in its stories. But if these ideas are so frightening in non-horror focused media, what if anime made with the sole intention of spooking the viewer? Well, any talk of such anime or manga should probably start with discussing one man, Junji Ito. A true juggernaut of Japanese horror, comparable to Western contemporaries like Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, and those YouTube channels that regurgitate r/no sleep with an AI voice to text.
No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers.
Real bone-chilling stuff. Junji Ito's work differs from these great authors in the fact Ito is a mangaka, working in an illustrative medium. He has the ability to put your wildest nightmares to page, with each of his stories being filled with illustrations that'll make you shit yourself from fear. Oh, haha, oops, good thing I was on the toilet. It would be a real crying shame to leave Ito's works on the shelves in the depths of Barnes & Noble's manga section. One would conclude his work should be adapted so more people could experience utter nausea by just seeing the phrase oil saturation 100%. Luckily for us, the perfect adaptation came out in 2024, in the form of Uzumaki, Spiral into Madness. Based on the 20-chapter series of the same name, the adaptation is able to capture the feeling of Ito's manga perfectly. The surreal, hyper-detailed work of his manga not only fitting perfectly on the big screen, or little screen, or medium screen, or iPod Nano touch screen, it even goes a step further, by having these grotesque works of art move exactly as they would in your mind, taking even the unconventional step of leaving the series in black and white, preserving even more of Uzumaki's surreal unearthliness. To me, watching this adaptation is the same as seeing the Mona Lisa move, riding around on a skateboard performing ollies and kickflips and 720 pop shove-its. Unfortunately though, it all ends up with the Mona Lisa tripping up on her legs and face planting on the pavement. Uzumaki was not to last. Despite the series only being 4 episodes long, it could not keep up with its own level of quality, taking a sharp decline by episode 2. The once horrifically beautiful illustrations now having the same attention to detail as a Naruto filler episode. Characters running by bobbing up and down, speaking like South Park characters, and just standing still, staring blankly at each other. In the last 3 episodes, there are a few good illustrations or set pieces that stick out, but none are given the time to simmer, as each scene lasts no more than 5 zeptoseconds, bouncing back and forth between unknown horrors like you're rolling down a hill in a porta potty. Your brain kinda gets numb to it after a while, not being able to register any scare before moving on. This isn't the first time Junji Ito's work has been adapted. This isn't even the first anime adaptation. All of them, though, are somehow worse than the last, an utter cavalcade of failure to adapt. And if you've heard of Ito's work before, then you probably heard the tale of his story supposedly being cursed to never become an anime. Fortunately for Ito, or unfortunately, if you really buy into the whole idea of curses, Ito's work isn't unique. Over the long decades of anime's evolution, there never has once been a truly scary horror anime. You know, in my opinion at least. Thankfully for me, doing a video on the entire genre of horror anime isn't as large of a task as it sounds. There's fewer horror anime than there are eyes staring at me from the bushes. Saying that though, I will still be condensing this discussion to just a few anime, so big spoiler warning for any of these listed shows. The Junji Ito anime adaptations, Another, the anime, Perfect Blue, the movie, Shiki, Neon Genesis Evangelion, The Summer Hikaru Died, and Theater of Darkness, Yamishabai? Well then, viewer beware, you're in for a scare. Or spoiler if you haven't seen these shows. So our first exhibit of this not scary exhibition are two Junji Ito anime adaptations, the 2018 Junji Ito collection and the annoyingly named Junji Ito Maniac, Japanese Tales of the Macabre. You know, you'd think you would reserve the title of Maniac for the freaks in the story, not the author himself. Anyway, compared to the egregious drop-off in quality of the Uzumaki anime previously talked about, the Ito collection stays a consistent mid for its runtime. It has all of the hallmarks of a low-budget seasonal anime that is only pushed out the door to keep the studio lights on, flat lighting, simplified characters with minimal detail, and most scenes being shot reverse shot framing or characters doing the cha-cha slide on the screen.
Cha-cha real smooth.
For a normal anime adaptation, this would be serviceable. The people in the video move sometimes, good enough. But the issue is that this quality simply isn't good enough for horror, let alone Junji Ito's horror. Because the special little scary boy is known for anything, it's his fucking phenomenal illustrations, the money shots, the page turners, the art that can fill you with a sense of dread and unease, or make you go, "Ah! Fuck! Get away from me, you dirty nightmare freak! May the power of this aerosol can compel you!" And the ghostly visage of a pirate for some reason. I want to drive this point home, because some of you may justify this lack of quality by saying, well, if the idea is scary, the art doesn't matter. Let's take the adaptation of The Long Dream, for example. It is a story where your dreams get exponentially longer, going from days to months to years, eventually living entire lifetimes in your mind. All the while, your real body changes with each passing night, seemingly adapting yourself to this alternate reality that exists solely inside your brain. I'm sure you've all had a nightmare before where it felt like you'll never wake up. The horror here is implicit. And since this idea is so good in the first place, who cares if my man's looks like dehydrated poop from a butt? No one complains that the Babadook from the Babadook looks corny, so why should it matter here? The imaginary straw man in my head argues. But you see, if that were the case, why didn't Junji Ito just write a book? He didn't because the highly detailed art is an integral part of the story, because if you don't have it, it looks like two fucking balloons bumping uglies with each other with no emotion in their faces. Ito's manga works, this doesn't. This is an inherent problem with most horror anime, but is obviously magnified when adapting Junji Ito. If a horror series fails to look scary, I see very little reason for it to exist. And I'll fight everyone on this opinion. Even the big horror man himself. Fucking made it and his opinion is wrong. During a press tour for the anime, Junji Ito praised certain story adaptations like The Long Dream and Hanging Blimps as being, quote, even better than the original. And I get it. He's on a press tour and doesn't want to slag off the work of hundreds of people. And he does bring up some good points like the music of the series, realizing an element that cannot exist in the manga. Specifically, he gasses up the song Polar Bell's Scat. You know, scat as in jazz, scatman beeba-dee-ba-do-do, dee-ba-dee-ba-do. Get your head out of the toilet, you fucking freak. Anyway, Paula Deen's nasty scat fetish is a really good track. You've been listening to it the past couple minutes, and it has the exact ghastly, zombified feel I imagined while reading the story for the first time. That being said, come on, Ito, baby, you're killing me. Have some gumption for your work that's being spat on, man. You're gonna make me cry over here. Because maybe if you'd been a little more critical, we wouldn't have gotten Junji Ito Maniac years later. Which was somehow even worse than this. Because despite being made 5 years after the Ito collection, it just looks terrible, man. Which of course means it just looks even less scary. Wait, just realizing Hanging Blimp was actually from this adaptation, not the other one. Whatever, all look like ass. Here's another example of bastardization to distract you from that. In the original manga story, the Hikizuri siblings are eerily off-putting. Their cold dead stares and fish-like physiognomy straight out of Innsmouth gives them this uncomfortable aura, reinforcing their sick and twisted personalities. And in the anime, they just look like a bunch of weird Mormons going through a goth phase. In the story, they summon the spirit of their dad for a seance. In the manga versions, the dad's stare is piercing and intimidating. It gives this lingering fear of parental disappointment. And in the anime version, hey wait, get back here. How am I supposed to absorb the feeling of being the shadow of my father if you're gonna run away after 3 seconds? There is a suffocating feeling to Ito's work that simply doesn't exist in these anime. It also doesn't help the tone of the series is all over the place. There's nothing that gets me quite in the mood for Japanese tales of the macabre than horrorcore dubstep rap. Yes really, listen to this shit. Well, that was certainly psychologically damaging. Speaking of, let's delve into the psychological horror subgenre, getting into the movie Perfect Blue. Psychological horror is an annoying categorization for a pissant like me, because as someone as neurotic as myself, most horror is psychological. Oh, Hereditary is so masterful in the way it's able to weave the natural horror of real life with the lingering fear in the back of your mind. It's so much better than all of those, in quotes, horror movies that rely on jump scares that I simply have too high of an IQ to be scared by. Shut up, made up idiot in my head. Schlock like Hellraiser is just as psychological and equally as scary. Both movies are good, so get the fuck off Letterboxd and stop making up genres that amount to horror media I like, and horror media I don't like. All of that to say, Perfect Blue is a great movie. It tells the story of a Japanese pop idol that everyone wants something different from, which all coincidentally have to do with her body. Which of course is terrifying to think about on a very human level. The story is elegantly told and the visuals exude this sort of unreality feeling throughout the movie. Yet, of course, there is only one issue. The scary anime movie still isn't scary. Sorry. There is the caveat that I am a non-Japanese and a man, so the themes of bodily consent don't hit me as hard. And despite being a gigaweeb, there is still a barrier between me and what idol culture is really like in Japan. Also, I watched the dub of the movie, which was pretty good besides one very important scene. Where the stalker guy attempts to rape the heroine, they gave him a 1950s mustache-twirling villain voice for some reason.
You tarnished Memerit's name, fooling that photographer and screenwriter! With that little mouth of yours!
I truly don't understand. It undercuts so much of the emotions of the scene, it's genuinely awful. With all of this accounted for, I still never felt that true sense of dread I'd get from a movie like Midsummer or Hereditary. And unfortunately, a lot of this just comes down to the art style for me. The biggest issue can be seen in the stalker character. If this movie were live action, not much would need to have been done to make this type of dude off-putting. Just put a fella like me in the role. Or don't. I take that back. Don't associate me with this guy. But since it's animated, to get even a sliver of that real-life unease, they needed to make the dude look like a fish. And maybe that works for some people, but for a fella like me, he looks like a little guppy I can swallow in one gulp. And as for the fantastical scenes of the movie, they are, visually they're great. They're stunning, they create this truly surreal vibe, but again, they just don't make me scared. They simply do not elicit a comparable feeling of fear to say a movie like Caroline. There is simply something to the anime art style that is too clean, too sanitized to be turned into a horrifying work of art. So what to do when you want to be a beautiful anime but you also want to horrify the viewer in ways never seen before? Well, you could do what Another did. Another anime, I mean. The anime called Another, if you know what I'm fucking talking about. It's the Final Destination anime. The anime equivalent of those Zen gardens where a guy with a rake gives sand cornrows. A truly beautiful sight to behold, before it is all washed away by the tide. Or another guy with a rake. the guy for rake in this case being the blood of a middle school girl doing a double front flip onto the pointy part of her umbrella. Didn't even know they had those. Or being crushed Looney Tunes style by an elevator. Perhaps from getting a heart attack by telling the new guy in class how well his sister fills out those apple bottom jeans. If I were to describe the anime another, it would be 20 minutes of children whispering to each other, speaking dialogue written by a guy whose greatest accolade is watching the melancholy of Haruhi Suzume once, that all accumulates into a spectacularly funny death at the end of the episode. Now, would have been great to watch if the previous 20 minutes hadn't already put you to sleep. I know the Final Destination movies gets a lot of flack for also being severely over the top, but there's a reason that franchise is so successful, right? Its level of violence is more cartoonish than even this anime, but it's also being done to real people, right? So it gives you that real, ooh, ouchie, yikes, wouldn't want that to happen to me, owie, feeling. It's really crazy to say that another's gore is somehow more mundane yet more unbelievable than this. They really walk that perfect tightrope of only being good enough to use in Discord gifs with captions like, how it feels when bro tells you no cam on goon sesh tonight. Alright then, what if we turn down the gore, added in some hashtag psychological horror, and a secret third thing? Well, with all of that, you'd get the anime Shiki, a horror story about vampires invading a rural Japanese town. Using the word invade makes it sound like the vampires are storming the beaches of Normandy. Wait. Actually, it's more like vampires slowly replacing people night by night, until the only people left are those who go bump in the night. You know, I have a lot of respect for a show that tries to make classic horror monsters actually scary. Keyword try. Because the idea of a family member suddenly dying one day, then a couple nights later appearing outside your second story window asking to come inside, it is a concept that is inherently chilling if done right. But, in all honesty, you're really not off to a great start. That your monster looks like a goth girl straight out of Hot Topic, that most teenagers watching would let kill for rock if she agreed to spit on them. Because when it comes to scaring the viewer, the show is just too nice to look at for its own good. It's to the point that I'm surprised this anime is even labeled a horror. The show's art style feels like the exact opposite of spooky, intentionally so. With even one of the vampires looking like a grown-up lumbosexual Gumball Waterson. If you're this comfortable with showing your monster, I don't think you care that much about horror in the first place. Because if anything, going into this show expecting to be scared takes away from the rest of it. I know I just took a massive steamy bloody soaked dump on the show, but Shiki is actually pretty good. It uses western themes like vampires and Christianity fanfiction to tell a compelling story, fusing these two ideas into something more in line with Lovecraftian horror, a town being slowly subsumed by an unknown entity. As more and more people disappear, and the more and more you learn, you find out something even more terrifying. The entities are more similar to humans than we may realize. Much like us, they just want a home where they could live and not be constantly on guard fearing for death every night. A place where they could walk out in the open, enjoy a nice meal, and talk to their neighbors. So if you were in this town folk's position, wouldn't you have a hard time choosing between you and your family's survival? Or the survival of a blood-sucking monster that literally exists to kill you? Yeah, sorry, it's not really a hard decision to make, no matter how many thousand-year-old lollies the anime uses to guilt-trip you. Despite the lack of spooky dookiness, the show rocks. If it weren't for Perfect Blue, Shiki would be the best anime I watched for this video. The themes are annoying, yes, what with the whole "what if humanity were the real monster" thing. But besides that, the writing's good, and the show's art style is bizarre, but it also fucking kicks ass. There's a real late 2000s feel you simply don't get in anime anymore. But that does not a good horror make. It still falls into the same broad pitfalls as every anime horror talked about so far. The ideas it presents are scary in theory, but land flatter than a white girl's ass at execution. And so, if all of the issues so far stem from anime sticking too close to their chest, what of an anime that casts itself off from the typical anime conventions? Neon Genesis Evangelion is a show that dickheads like me watch once, but can't help to shoehorn it into every conversation. The reason I am able to squeeze its scrawny twink ass into this video is its unconventional style of horror. To skip an over an hour long yapathon, Eva is a show that really shouldn't exist. They ran out of budget by the last episode, and were literally still animating the show until the last minute it aired. Yet because of this bizarre production that would have doomed any other show, Eva creates something truly unique. Because it has budget for little else, it isn't afraid to leave us in the quiet. Staring at monsters, staring back at us unblinkingly. Staring long enough into the abyss, yada yada. Where the Junji Ito adaptations couldn't hold onto a frame for longer than 2 seconds, Eva knows when to hold a shot for just long enough to let a sense of unease settle in. It knows what to show, and when to not, as is the case with its monsters called angels. When Shinji gets sucked up into a black abyss below his feet that appeared out of thin air, very little is needed to convey the terrifying depths of the situation. In fact, just leaving Shinji, and by extension us, alone in the void, it allows the horror of the situation to truly sink in, just Shinji alone, as his life flashes before his eyes. My personal favourite scene in the show, on a horror element at least, happens much later, with the arrival of the 15th angel. Floating stagnant in orbit, completely out of reach of our heroine, she is helpless to stop the behemoth onslaught of her mind. We as viewers also cannot escape it. No matter whose perspective we switch to, Handel's Messiah rings out in our heads. I am particularly chuffed this episode for a lot of reasons, but the main one would have to be my bias towards analog horror. Yes, I'm a zoomer, get over it. A horribly cheap art form that makes heavy use of stock music, stock images, shitty VHS filters and film grain, to create the feeling that the scene in Eva exudes out of all of its bloodied orifices, giving the true unmistakable feeling of fight, flight, or please for the love of God just let me lay down and fucking die. That's a lot better now, isn't it? This quiet. It really gives us time to contemplate and reflect on why no one actually cares about horror anime. Shows like Another, Shiki, the Ito Benito collections rarely come up in anime discussions. Through most of the research I've done, the only time anime like these appear is when people are specifically talking about horror anime. So not a lot. And usually through the lens of, why are nobody else talking about these shows? It's not like I've cherry-picked some obscure indie bullshit like Naruto either. On the website My Anime List, Another is ranked number 62 in popularity, whatever that means. See, look, it's even higher than Psycho Pass, an anime that came out the same year and people still actually talk about today. But if this isn't enough to convince you, let's break down some more numbers, and then dive into the real deal Creel Steel reason anime horror sucks hot sweaty loads. Global statistics say 1 out of 3 people watch anime at least once a week, so, you know, just a casual 2 billion people watching every week. Heavy asterisks there. You may say, alright, that's cool, but why does this matter? And if I may reply, it is important to know this number so we can also know where your average person watches anime. So, gun to your head, your balls and or pussy in advice, what do you think are the top places people watch anime? You know, streaming services like Crunchyroll, Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Amazon Prime, or other rather salty sources. Time's up. A survey asking where do you, if at all, watch anime? The results are Netflix at 48%, Disney Plus at 32%, and Prime Video at 29%. Crunchyroll doesn't even show up in the top 5. Meanwhile, Disney Plus only has like 20 anime in its catalog and it's in the top 3. Amazon Prime also only has like 20 anime. Or literally every anime depending on how you look at it. You know, this is why surveys can be really fucking annoying. Alright, so, you get the point. These are the places most people watch anime. Therefore, their catalogs are the anime most people watch. Through this, we can learn the anime genres people actually care enough to pay more than $30 a month for. Ah shit. When people search, watch insert anime here online, it's one of these streaming services they'll use. Or of course a secret third thing. And now we know where most people watch anime, we can take a deeper look into the distribution of genres. The horror genre in specific, of course. Netflix carries 275 asterisks total anime as of writing this video. The asterisk is there because Netflix includes live action and non-Japanese anime in their categorization. And listen, I'm not having that discussion on what is and isn't anime. If I did, half of you would agree with me either way. Out of this 275 anime, only 10 of them are horror, using the website MyAnimeList as a metric. A bit lacking there, innit? Well, let's not be conclusive just yet. Maybe Netflix's audience in particular doesn't like to be scared during their Chinese cartoons. In comparison, how much horror does Crunchyroll have? Well, if you look here and I never looked up their stats. Fuck it, we'll do it live. Alright, Google, how much anime does Crunchyroll have in its catalog? Of course, the first thing to pop up is the fuck-ass AI. You hear that? Even the monsters are groaning at it. All it's giving me is a rough estimate of over 1,000 anime. Annoyingly vague. And what's their source? Wikipedia. Of course. Okay, so what's Wikipedia's source then? An article from Crunchyroll themselves. Promising. From over 8 years ago. Less promising. That also links to a defunct page. What an amazing internet we live in now. Alright, booting up the Wayback Machine, scrolling down the page, and you gotta be fucking kidding me. This is a different number. It is 200 less than what Wikipedia cites. I fucking hate it here, man. Fine, whatever. Back to Google. Looking up an up-to-date article, scrolling, and oh yeah, fucking course. Crunchyroll does have an up-to-date stat of their catalog, but they don't have the actual number of anime they carry. Just the amount of watch hours and episodes they hold. Where did I leave that copy of the Anarchist Cookbook? I got some doors I need to knock on. Anyway, Crunchyroll has 1,127 anime in their collection as of the writing for this video, which I found from a completely different Wikipedia article. Out of that 1,127 total, Crunchyroll has, they have no fucking horror category is what they have. Going through Crunchyroll's catalog and cross-referencing them with my anime list, Crunchyroll has 18 horror titles in their collection. Fuck me, why was that so hard to find? Anyway, in conclusion, this means 2.5% of Netflix anime is horror. What all of this means is 1. The faculties of the internet are dying at an alarming rate, and 2. There is simply very little appetite for anime horror in the general market. Despite anime being Netflix's biggest growing sector, mind you, and I don't mean just like growing like 1 or 2%, it equates to like 50% of Netflix's growth last year. So then, this is the part of the video where I get the pointed laugh and say,
I am too smart. I am too smart. I am too smart. I am too smart. S-M-R-T. I mean S-M-A-R-T.
But not quite yet though. I've shown that people aren't interested in anime horror, I've shown why that's the case given its low quality, but there is still one question left unanswered. Why is anime horror just that fucking bad then? To understand that, we need to break down how anime is actually made, and why someone would use anime to tell their story over say alternatives like manga or Korean puppet shows. Because the biggest driver for horror as a genre is that it's inherently cheap to make. Sure, there are big blockbusters like the Alien franchise, or movies like Labyrinth or Dark Crystals of the world. But besides these notable exceptions, most horror is made from $2, a ham sandwich, and a reach around. Think of movies like Saw or Paranormal Activity, and in the gaming world, Roblox, Garden of Choo Choo Chapel, Scary Doors, Backrooms, FNAF. The language of horror is using very little to create a lot. It uses fear innate to humans to tell their stories. You know, everyone gets scared. And that's what makes horror weirdly niche despite its popularity. Movies like The Exorcist can hit Protestant America as hard as Jesus Christ actually coming back to life. But if you show that movie to an atheist, or just a person that's not particularly spiritual, it won't leave nearly as large of an impression. Horror as a genre targets specific niches with cheap, pinpoint, efficient precision. That's kinda what it's all about. This may get the gears in your head turning. The anime is much the same way. It's practically built on taking nerds' hyperfixations, then inserting an anime girl somewhere on the screen, and printing one Umamusu $1 million. Comparative to other animation, anime is cheap to produce. But this is where we see the fundamental difference between horror and anime. Horror is cheap in general. Anime is cheap to mass produce. This isn't an opinion, by the way. There's more anime that comes out every year than literally anything else. I mean, even comparing genre for genre, isekai is almost going bar for bar with oversaturated genres like superheroes. 300 isekai anime was released in the past decade, compared to over 320 superhero movies and TV shows. Going further and zooming out to a macro lens, over 1,000 seasons of anime get produced every year, with around 200 of that being new anime. There's a lot of slop that gets churned out for us piggies to wallow in. Granted, a lot of this gets caused by sweatshop conditions in these anime studios. If you put the same amount of man hours in anime production into, say, miniature painting ASMR videos, then you'd get a lot of ASMR war orcs dumped out into the world. But the reason these cobalt minor conditions exist in the first place is because of how standardized anime is. The reason most anime look the same is so artists can pump out art and easily transfer their skills into the next show they work on. Even if you have a favorite show that deviates from the typical anime style, say something flashy like Demon Slayer or more gritty like Attack on Titan, those shows practically never deviate from that style. Every episode, every scene all look the exact same, which is perfectly fine for most genre. But when it comes to horror, repetition is the absolute last thing you want. Junji Ito has a very high baseline for art in his manga. Everything he does has a certain level of chutzpah to it, some real cha-cha-cha. Yet he always saves his best work for the page turners, the real money shots. Because when you make something scary, you have to really emphasize the detail. For animation, you need to explain through your pen strokes why what we're looking at is scary, which is something anime cannot do as a medium. Sure, it can amp up the animation, make shit fly around the screen in a beautiful flurry of colors, but for your typical anime, there is no difference between how a side character is drawn and the monster that is currently devouring them. Anime, by its very nature, cannot deviate from itself, lest it stop being anime. Even after explaining all of that, I can't help but be left with a lingering thought. Why? In that last clip, I showed the anime Mob Psycho 100, which actually does deviate from its own style quite a lot, running counter to my whole argument. When it wants to convey the otherworldliness of a spirit, it uses oil paintings, moving around in splotches. Granted, it's not scary, Mob Psycho doesn't want to scare you, but why can't actual horror anime do this? You'd think an adaptation of Junji Ito or any other horror manga would be the perfect time to pull out something avant-garde. Using real people's eyes or teeth in place of a monster. Using charcoal etching, cellophane, or just any other form of mixed media to really amp up your horror. Holding onto a frame a little longer than comfortable to really convey that feeling of looking at a manga panel. I know anime is literally short for animation, but not everything needs to be bouncing around the screen all the time. And I know Evangelion didn't do it because it wanted to, but in my opinion, the elevator scene is my favorite in that whole show. Just a still, unmoving image with no dialogue for like 2 minutes, that conveys an emotion that is otherwise impossible for anime. That being said, the reason I get so frustrated by this stuff is because I know it is possible for horror anime to work. I've been giving examples this whole video, and for the past decade, there has been a long-running horror series that sees very little buzz in the West. It is called Theater of Darkness, Yami-sabai, which rights all the wrongs I've been yapping about. It is a very cheap series, each episode only being 4 minutes long and animated like a paper puppet show, with each story, in quotes, animated by a different artist, adapting a different Japanese folktale for the modern day. If you've been paid attention to this video and not have been browsing TikToks, listening to AI rap and jacking your shit crazy style, then I shouldn't have to explain why this style of presentation works so well. Theater of Darkness is able to create a better sense of dread in 4 minutes than the another anime could do over the course of its whole series. Using a combination of quietness, mixed media, and still unmoving panels, it is able to make silly concepts like elevator that sends you to hell, or cursed photocopier, or even the poop demon actually terrifying. Give it a chance. Sure, it doesn't bet 1,000, but there are bound to be a few episodes that'll keep your lights on at night. If I sound different, don't worry about it. And if you want a recommendation you'll actually use, The Summer Hikaru Died is a fantastic manga, with even the street saying has an even better anime adaptation. The Elm Streets, that is. We have fun here. Hikaru's Wet Hot American Summer is the story of a boy who got lost in the woods and came back not a boy, but a monster boy. Our protagonist is the friend of this monster boy, who is the only person in this small rural village that can tell something is amiss. That the thing walking like Hikaru, talking like Hikaru, hacking, slapping, slacking like Hikaru is not really him. Sounds great, right? Looks fucking amazing. We love sweatshops, don't we, folks? Not only that, what if I told you the only thing gayer than Hikaru knows what you did last summer is those re-uploads of gay pornos of YouTube before the porn cut out?
You wouldn't believe what I'm picking up from the security camera in the main.
True horror fans know a little bit of gayness is the most important element to any true horror, like the previously mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street. But unlike that movie, you don't have to use a magnifying glass to see all the gay undertones. They're very overt, man. In the show, the two seclude themselves in a gym storeroom, where Hikaru tells Yoshiki how warm he feels inside. About as subtle as an American spy plane. You should really check out The Summer Hikaru Busted It Down sensual style, but you should also keep one thing in mind for your first viewing. It's not scary at all. Sorry.